In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. This simple rhyme paints a picture of a daring explorer venturing into the unknown, discovering a new world ripe for the taking. But what if we were to challenge this narrative? The truth is, Christopher Columbus did not discover America. For centuries, the story of Christopher Columbus has been one of triumph and exploration. However, this narrative often glosses over the true nature of his expeditions and their devastating consequences. Columbus's arrival in the Americas marked the beginning of a brutal chapter marked by conquest, disease, and exploitation. The Americas have a rich and complex history that stretches back thousands of years before Columbus's arrival. Diverse indigenous cultures flourished, developing intricate social structures, sophisticated agricultural practices, and profound spiritual beliefs. To fully grasp the significance of Columbus's arrival, we must first acknowledge the presence and achievements of those who came before him. In the annals of history, 1492 stands as a pivotal year. Christopher Columbus, a seasoned mariner from Genoa, embarked on a voyage that would forever alter the course of human events. Driven by a thirst for adventure and wealth, Columbus secured the patronage of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain. Armed with rudimentary navigational tools, Columbus set sail from the port of Palos, Spain, with 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. His journey into the unknown was fraught with challenges, testing the limits of human endurance. Little did he know that his voyage would lead him to a continent unknown to Europeans, a land already teeming with life and ancient civilizations. On October 12, 1492, land was finally sighted. Columbus christened the small island in the Bahamas as San Salvador. Believing he had reached Asia, he called the indigenous people he encountered Indians. The native Taino people greeted the newcomers with curiosity and hospitality. Columbus, blinded by his ambitions, viewed them as potential subjects of the Spanish crown and a source of wealth. As Columbus explored the Caribbean, he remained convinced that he had reached the East Indies. His writings reveal a fundamental misunderstanding of the world he had stumbled upon. Blinded by his quest for gold, he failed to appreciate the intricate social structures and deep spiritual beliefs of the Taino society. The lands Columbus stumbled upon were far from empty. The Americas were a vibrant tapestry of human life, home to hundreds of distinct indigenous cultures. From the Amazon basin to the Andes Mountains, indigenous peoples had adapted to a staggering range of environments. They had mastered agriculture, constructed intricate social structures, and developed complex systems of governance, trade, and diplomacy. Section 2, Masters of Mesoamerica, Maya, Aztec, and Inca civilizations. The Maya, renowned for their advanced mathematics, astronomy, and hieroglyphic writing system, constructed sprawling cities adorned with towering pyramids. The Aztecs forged a powerful empire centered on their magnificent capital, Tenochtitlan. Meanwhile, high in the Andes Mountains, the Inca Empire stretched from present-day Colombia to Chile. These civilizations were sophisticated and complex, with thriving urban centers, advanced technologies, and rich artistic traditions. Section 3. The North, a Tapestry of Nations. The arrival of Europeans in the Americas often overshadows the rich and diverse history of indigenous peoples in what is now the United States and Canada. From the Haudenosaunee Confederacy to the Pueblo peoples, the North American continent was home to a vast array of cultures. Section 4. Erasing a World. The Myth of the Empty Land. The narrative of Columbus discovering America often relies on the misconception that the Americas were sparsely populated. The arrival of Europeans unleashed a wave of disease, warfare, and displacement that decimated indigenous populations. This deliberate erasure of indigenous presence and history has had a lasting impact, shaping the demographics, politics, and cultural landscapes of the Americas to this day. While the story of Christopher Columbus is often presented as the beginning of European interaction with the Americas, a closer look at history reveals a different narrative. Centuries before Columbus, intrepid explorers from Scandinavia, known as Vikings, had already ventured across the treacherous waters of the North Atlantic. They established settlements in Iceland and Greenland, pushing the boundaries of the known world. Their voyages to the Americas add another layer of complexity to the story of transatlantic exploration. Among the most celebrated figures in Viking lore is Leif Erikson, a Norse explorer often credited with leading the first European expedition to reach continental North America. Around the year 1000, Leif set sail from Greenland with a crew of around 35 men, following reports of a land to the west. His saga provides a glimpse into the Vikings' remarkable seafaring abilities and their encounters with a new and unfamiliar world. Compelling evidence points to a site at L'Anse aux Meadows on the northern tip of Newfoundland, Canada. Discovered in 1960, this site yielded the remains of Norse structures, confirming a Norse presence in the region around the year 1000. The discovery at L'Anse aux Meadows provided tangible proof of a pre-Columbian European presence in North America. Despite their remarkable journey across the Atlantic, the Vikings' presence in North America was relatively short-lived. Historians speculate that a combination of factors, including hostility from indigenous populations and harsh environmental conditions, contributed to their decision to abandon Vinland. Ultimately, the Vikings' foray into North America remained a fleeting episode in the grand tapestry of history. A world transformed, the Columbian Exchange. Columbus's voyages ignited a chain of events with profound consequences for the world. His arrival in the Caribbean began an era of unprecedented exchange between the eastern and western hemispheres. This exchange was complex and often unequal, with devastating consequences for indigenous populations. It introduced new crops and livestock to both Europe and the Americas. Foods like tomatoes, potatoes, maize, and chocolate transformed European diets and contributed to population growth. Conversely, horses, cattle, pigs, and sheep altered indigenous landscapes and lifestyles. This exchange of flora and fauna had a profound impact on ecosystems across the globe. The shadow of conquest, disease, exploitation, and the devastation of indigenous peoples. While the Columbian Exchange brought about significant changes to the world, it also cast a long shadow of conquest, disease, and exploitation over the Americas. The arrival of Europeans in the Western Hemisphere unleashed a wave of devastation on indigenous populations, who had no immunity to diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza that were commonplace in Europe. These diseases spread like wildfire through indigenous communities, decimating entire populations and shattering social structures. The demographic collapse that followed was of catastrophic proportions, with some estimates suggesting that up to 90% of the indigenous population of the Americas perished within a century of European contact. This demographic catastrophe had profound and lasting consequences for indigenous societies, disrupting cultural transmission, decimating knowledge systems, and leaving many communities vulnerable to further exploitation. The arrival of Europeans also ushered in an era of brutal exploitation and enslavement. Driven by a thirst for gold, silver, and other resources, European powers, often with the support of the Church, engaged in violent conquest, claiming indigenous lands as their own and forcing Native Americans into servitude. Indigenous peoples were subjected to forced labor in mines and on plantations, their traditional ways of life disrupted, their cultures suppressed, and their very existence threatened. The legacy of Christopher Columbus is a complex and often contradictory one. He is celebrated as a visionary explorer, a skilled navigator, and a pivotal figure in world history. Yet, his voyages also mark the beginning of a dark chapter in human history, one characterized by colonialism, exploitation, and the systematic oppression of indigenous peoples. To fully understand the impact of Columbus, we must move beyond simplistic narratives of heroism and discovery and confront the uncomfortable truths about the violence, disease, and dispossession that followed in the wake of his voyages. It is essential to acknowledge the resilience and resistance of indigenous peoples, who, despite facing unimaginable hardships, have preserved their cultures, languages, and traditions, continuing to thrive and contribute to the rich tapestry of human diversity. The story of the Americas is not a simple tale of discovery and progress, but a complex and often tragic narrative of encounter, conflict, and resilience. By acknowledging the full scope of Columbus's legacy, both the positive and the negative, we can begin to engage in a more honest and nuanced understanding of history and its enduring impact on the world we live in today. Christopher Columbus's place in history is a subject of ongoing debate, his image shifting from venerated hero to a symbol of colonial oppression. For centuries, he was lauded as a visionary, a man who dared to challenge the boundaries of the known world and opened up new frontiers for exploration and discovery. Statues were erected in his honor, cities and streets bore his name, and his voyages were celebrated as pivotal moments in the advancement of human civilization. However, this traditional narrative, often presented without context or nuance, has come under increasing scrutiny in recent decades. The romanticized image of Columbus as a benevolent discoverer has given way to a more critical examination of his actions and their far-reaching consequences. The focus has shifted from glorifying the discoverer to acknowledging the experiences and perspectives of those who were already present in the lands Columbus found, the indigenous peoples of the Americas. This shift in perspective necessitates a more nuanced understanding of history, one that acknowledges the complexities and contradictions inherent in human narratives. It requires recognizing that progress for some often came at the expense of others, and that the celebration of historical figures should not come at the cost of erasing or minimizing the suffering of those who were marginalized, exploited, or silenced. The changing perception of Columbus's legacy is reflected in the growing movement to replace Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day. Columbus Day, first celebrated as a federal holiday in 1937, has long been controversial. While some see it as a celebration of Italian-American heritage, critics argue it glorifies colonialism and ignores the impact on indigenous populations. The movement for Indigenous Peoples Day gained momentum in the latter half of the 20th century. Indigenous communities and allies called for a more accurate representation of history. They argued for honoring the resilience and contributions of indigenous peoples. Today, many cities and states in the U.S. recognize Indigenous Peoples Day. Often celebrated on the second Monday of October, it coincides with Columbus Day. This shift acknowledges historical injustices and promotes inclusivity. The journey towards a more complete and accurate understanding of history is an ongoing process. It requires questioning long-held assumptions, challenging dominant narratives, and amplifying the voices and perspectives that have been traditionally marginalized or silenced. The story of the Americas, like all historical narratives, is not a fixed or monolithic entity, but a tapestry woven from multiple threads, each representing different experiences, perspectives, and interpretations of events. Uncovering the true history of the Americas involves delving into archaeological evidence, exploring indigenous oral histories and traditions, and examining historical documents from a critical lens that acknowledges the biases and power dynamics of the time. It means moving beyond Eurocentric narratives that center on European exploration and conquest, and embracing a more inclusive and holistic approach to understanding the past. It requires recognizing the interconnectedness of human history, acknowledging the ways in which cultures have interacted, influenced, and shaped one another over time. This ongoing process of historical inquiry is not simply an academic exercise, but a vital component of building a more just and equitable future. By understanding the complexities of the past, acknowledging the injustices and triumphs that have shaped our present, we can work towards creating a future that honors the diversity of human experience and recognizes the inherent dignity and worth of all people.